In today's Insight, military influence. In the days after the September 11th attacks, the U.S. military budget skyrocketed nearly 80%. Now it is beginning to drop as the U.S. winds down two wars, finding itself saddled with a growing national debt. At the same time, other countries like China are significantly raising their defense spending. It's the combination that top U.S. military leaders say could cause the loss of a military edge in the coming years. For more on this story, we're joined by CCTV's Callebs. Sean.
Well, thanks, Elaine. They do point out if it does happen, it isn't going to happen overnight. One expert told me earlier today, just because China unveils a stealth aircraft doesn't mean they have a squadron of them. Many say the problem with the U.S. military and its budget is the way its defense cuts are being handled.
Ready! Ready! Up!
The United States far outspends any other nation on earth in defense, investing nearly $500 billion this past year. Despite that, there have been open warnings from top U.S. military leaders that America is slowly losing its edge, especially in an area the U.S. has thrived, technology.
We're now going into a murkier era where there's lots of complexity, there's other powers rising, China and others in different regions, and I think so we're still sort of trying to figure out where are we headed next.
The leading Pentagon official in charge of military purchases says the U.S. better find its way, and quickly. Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Fred Kendall told reporters in Singapore, "We've relied on technological superiority for decades now as one of the fundamental things that sets our military apart. And I do see that that's not assured given the investments being made by China as well as other powers."
A country as advanced as China will become a much more serious military power over time. But it isn't instant.
Analysts point out many of the U.S. cuts are self-inflicted. Firstly, sequestration, forced across-the-board reductions in spending instead of measures that are less important. And the U.S. Congress continues to vote hikes and more benefits that are frequently popular with voters, but some argue hardly the best measure to build a combat-ready force.
Let's be blunt about that. Do you want a highly paid dead soldier because there isn't a soldier next to them? You aren't helping the troops if all you do is think about pay and privileges.
There is, of course, the argument that the U.S. has pulled out of Iraq and winding down operations in Afghanistan after more than a decade of fighting. So U.S. defense spending should be reduced. But experts say it goes much deeper than that. The U.S. is spending less on research and development and troop readiness. And that, they say, is simply not a good equation if the U.S. wants to continue to project its power across the world, Elaine.
Well, Sean, you say that the U.S. military readiness has been adversely affected. Can you explain that?
Yeah, Anthony Quartersman told us that basically with the number of troops that have left, you're losing 10 brigades. That's about 10,000 troops. It could have an immediate impact if troops had to be dispatched to a certain area of the world. And then secondly, with the budget cuts, that means you're not maintaining aircraft as well as you used to, not maintaining ships as well as you used to. You're not getting the kind of training that troops had been getting in the time leading up to now. So there is that concern. But the biggest concern Quartersman talked about was sequestration. Listen to what he had to say about that.
Now, there are a lot of factors involved here. One is you are cutting spending. Another is the way you're cutting it. When you have forced cuts, as we did last year through sequestration, you have to cut across the board. You can't do the things you really should cut. And that did serious damage to readiness.
And Quartersman puts the onus on Congress. I really want to point that out. He said that basically sequestration, because it was an idea so stupid that nobody would agree to it. Nobody would get to the point where you had to have across-the-board cuts, not cut the items that are least important. And in the future, the U.S. could be paying the price for that. He says it's not going to happen now, but if something like this continues for the next decade, certainly the U.S. is not going to be the power that it is today.
Well, Sean, there's been a lot of talk globally about the rising influence of China's military, the spending that's taking place there on the military programs, gaining new assets, some of the equipment that you mentioned. But China is also showing signs of growing closer to other nations. Can you talk about that a bit?
They really kind of work hand in hand. China's military spending has gone up about 10 or 11% a year. They have a large number of ground troops. So a lot of the money that is being spent, of course, is going to be to maintain those ground troops, keep them paid. But secondly, they're getting a lot more training, a lot more work with other forces. Over the past year, they've already had 21 different training exercises with different nations. That's very significant, showing their influence in the region and showing how now they are working with a lot of different countries out there.
All right, Sean Callebs with Insight. Thank you so much for that.